Is Qiuyuan actually going to end up being a more valuable pull than Galbrena? Hear me out on this. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So, we're coming up on 2.7, and we're gonna have Galbrena out soon. And I initially believed that for most people, Galbrena would be a more valuable pull than Qiuyuan on his own, and for most people I will say that that does still hold up. However, because of a recent realization I've had, I'm actually thinking that for a certain subset of people, Qiuyuan might actually end up being a more valuable pull than her. What I mean by this is that investing into Qiuyuan is going to do more for your account in the long term than investing into Galbrena. Now obviously there's a lot of different factors that go into this. For example, do you already have 4 good teams for TOA? If you don't, then investing into Galbrena is going to be more worth it for you. So there are multiple things that go into this, and we can't really just definitively say that for every single account, one character is going to be better than the other. It just depends on too many factors. But I would like to highlight one specific factor today that is going to make Qiuyuan a better pull for you than Galbrena possibly. If you're lacking a good fusion hypercarry, or you just perhaps need another DPS for some reason, then yes, Galbrena is going to still end up being a better pull for you value-wise. There are multiple situations in which she is going to be better for you. However, if you're somebody that really cares about Frolova, you're who I want to focus on. I essentially made the realization that Qiuyuan could honestly end up being a bit more broken than I expected. Not exactly for every single account, but for accounts that own Frolova, absolutely. And this is simply because she is really good in the meta right now. She's absolutely dominating Whimpering Wastes, and she had her sole weakness removed with the introduction of longer TOA floors. So she's generally one of the best DPSs that you can get right now, if not the best DPS you can get right now. Cantarella is a very fixed link in her team. That just isn't going to change. But Roshia, she very much can be changed. And my hypothesis is that Qiuyuan is going to replace her 3rd slot. So, how does this contribute to Qiuyuan being a better account pull than Galbrena potentially? Assuming that you already have 4 TOA teams, and you have multiple different types of elements to cover for different types of situations, then I feel like it's actually going to be better for you to just pull Qiuyuan instead. Now ideally, sure, you would just be able to get both, because then you can have both of the Echo skill damage DPSs and also the Echo skill damage buffer guy. However, this is assuming that you're limited and you can only pick up one. And if that's the situation, and you do already have a Frolova, then I don't actually see much need to go and get Galbrena, because you already have a strong Echo skill damage DPS. And you might think that I'm overvaluing the character a bit here because he's niche, but the way that I see it is that if you're a considerable boost to a DPS, to the point where you might even make them the best DPS in the game, I don't really think that should go unacknowledged. I think that that's actually a pretty big deal, if anything, because goodness me, Frolova is just so far ahead of the curve right now. And another aspect of this is that I personally feel like Frolova is just going to be a better DPS than Galbrena on the whole. She is just ridiculously ahead of the curve right now in every aspect, and Qiuyuan is only solidifying this further. So even if Galbrena does come out and ends up being a really strong DPS, let's say you pull her and Qiuyuan, but you also have a Frolova on your account, you might rather just stick him with Frolova in order to access her top potential. Now with that being said, Galbrena obviously has other options that you're able to use. She's not exactly locked to Qiuyuan, so there's very much situations in which you're able to make them coexist on one account. Very easily, actually, especially if you have some of the other Fusion 5 stars. And this is what I was saying. You can't really rigidly say, yes, this character is straight up just not worth it for you under any circumstance, because there are so many different things that go into it. And I will say that with Galbrena, let's say that you do have Lupa, Brant, maybe a couple of other fusions. In that case, you very much can have them work on the same account, because then you can give Qiuyuan to Frolova, and you can give the other fusions to Galbrena, and you've got yourself a very strong middle tower core. But the main thing that I'm really trying to drive home here is Frolova Glaze. I generally would put her above Galbrena in terms of value, because she is so good in wuwa. Obviously, Galbrena could come out, and maybe she's going to absolutely rock the floor with wuwa. That could end up happening, and if that happens, then it's definitely going to become more of a tight competition. But you have to understand why I'm a little bit skeptical as to how that could ever happen, because, dude, goodness me, Frolova is so good in wuwa. Like, she annihilates the competition right now. And that's the thing, she is just such a definitively powerful DPS, and pushing her to the next level is a genuinely terrifying thought, and that is why I'm really glazing Qiuyuan here. But here's the thing, this isn't really a Galbrena versus Qiuyuan situation, as much as it's a Galbrena versus Frolova situation. Now, like I said, they obviously fulfill very different things. You're going to be getting Galbrena because you want the fusion hypercarry, and if you're getting Frolova, it's because you want a good Havoc DPS, or perhaps you want somebody that's really good for your wuwa. So I'm not necessarily making a direct comparison between the two here, I'm more so just putting into perspective how Qiuyuan provides a springboard for another DPS to far surpass Galbrena, and to be honest, most other DPSs. I don't know how powerful she's going to end up being. We're obviously just going to have to wait for real testing to come out, see what actually happens whenever Qiuyuan finally drops. But if it does end up being broken, then I do think that for a subset of people, Qiuyuan is just a better character to pull for. And the reason why I think this is interesting is because I feel like it's very easy to think that Qiuyuan's just not really going to be a good unit, or that he's just some filler guy. I mean, I myself didn't actually have that much faith in his kit. He's being sandwiched in between Galbrena, and I believe that Chisa's most likely next. I don't think they're going to hold her off until any later. 2.x appears to almost be over after all. And you have to consider that Chisa's a very popular character, so I wasn't really expecting Qiuyuan to get that much love, but now I'm starting to see the vision. Now I'm starting to understand. He's broken, just not in a way that I expected. Well, okay, I want to avoid using strong language such as broken, because that suggests that he's going to absolutely knock around the meta, but I don't really think that's going to be the case. I just think he's going to be a pretty good upgrade to the Frolova team, and we're actually going to have to wait and see how much of an upgrade that he's going to be. But I still think that it's interesting that, for a substantial amount of people, he may actually end up being a better pull than Galbrena, because Frolova is a strong DPS, and you have to consider that this is not like him working with some random DPS that's not really all that good. No, this is actually a pretty considerable thing. We could genuinely be looking at the best DPS in the game across both game modes. And I will say now, if you don't want Qiuyuan but you love Frolova, you don't need him. She is still going to be very strong if you just keep using your Cantarella and you keep using your Roshia or Shorekeeper, or whoever you're planning to use as your final slot teammate. He's obviously not going to be a necessity, but undeniably, I think he is definitely going to boost her up. And when you consider that, it just makes me feel like Qiuyuan is actually a bit higher value than I initially gave him credit for and that everyone else initially gave him credit for. So what exactly does this mean in terms of Galbrena's value? And can we really say that he's more valuable than Galbrena for a vast majority of accounts? And what if you have Frolova but you're planning to pull for Qiuyuan? Well, I feel like there's a lot of different things at play here. For starters, I think that you can still very much make use out of Galbrena on an account, but wants to use their Qiuyuan with Frolova instead. You can also look at it from this angle. Because she's such a strong DPS, you can also just use Qiuyuan with Galbrena instead because she would quote-unquote need the help more. Or you can even just use more Teffy Shorekeeper with your Galbrena and get by just fine. It's obviously not going to be as strong as using Best in Slot, but it's still definitely going to work, and because she's a hyper carry, I have faith that it's not really going to be that bad. And then if you've already invested into the other Fusion 5 stars, well then there you go. That is another very viable option for you that you can very much enjoy. So all around, you have plenty of options with these characters, and there are definitely ways to make them coexist. My point is not so much, if you have Frolova, there is absolutely no reason ever to get Galbrena, and if you want them both, well then you're screwed. No, that is not the point that I'm trying to make here. It's more so that if you already have a Frolova, and you can only pull for one character in 2.7, I would honestly edge you more towards Qiuyuan at this point, because even if you do have a reasonable reason to pick up Galbrena, I personally think that you're going to thank yourself later when you realize how freaking broken your Frolova is going to become. Now, there is also the situation that you did pull for Roshia, and in that sense, you can just keep using Roshia of a Triple Havoc team, and then continue to use Qiuyuan with your Galbrena. Like I said, there are just so many ways that you can make these two coexist with one another. Coexistence is far from the issue. In fact, I would say that it's not really the issue whatsoever. It's more so just me saying that I think this character is actually pretty valuable, and maybe you should keep an eye on him. Like, sure, he's niche, but you have to consider, most second slots are niche. Most of them only work with a couple of teammates really well, and that is their main job. Not everybody is a Brant Wuthering Waves a Sig or a Yuno. Most of them do have specific set areas in which they want to work. And while that does make them more restrictive, they are highly effective in the areas in which they work, and it makes sense because there are only 3 team slots in this game, hence why I usually call them second slot teammates, because they are second slots to whoever the first slot is. So if you felt like Qiuyuan was not a good unit, I'm pretty sure I've probably driven the point home at this stage that, yeah, he's gonna be good, even if just because of Frolova. And I am saying that because I think that Frolova is going to be an all-around more valuable unit than Galbrena, because I realistically cannot see her outperforming her in Whimpering Wastes, while still being able to have the power that she's going to have in TOA whenever she gets that damage boost from Qiuyuan. While there's definitely nuance to this situation, I still think that Qiuyuan's just generally going to be a more valuable pull than Galbrena on the whole. Obviously heavily depends, and obviously if you didn't pull for Frolova, then this literally just doesn't apply to you. And of course, if you only have 2 or 3 DPSs for TOA, well then once again, Galbrena ends up rising in value for your account again. It literally just depends. But either way, you get the idea. Hopefully this video was able to tell you why Qiuyuan might end up being more valuable than Galbrena on the whole. This has been Juice, signing out, and he sure as hell is valuable to me because I want to S6 him.